and less about regulating. At least that's how we're thinking about it for now.
Great. Well, I'm happy to just listen in and hear what you guys have found.
Yeah, I would say for today's meeting, we're really not going to dive in too much. The next step is probably going to be some sort of public discussion about it in maybe August, September timeframe. So I just need to set a date for that. And we're also working on some language for a potential ordinance and stuff. So I would stay tuned, but today is not the day that we're really going to dive into it.
Okay, so maybe I'll just hang up and I'll be on the lookout for more information in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, stay posted on the agenda.
Okay.
And I don't know, we got to work on, we'll try to put stuff up on the website and whatnot, but feel free to reach out.
Mhm.
If you have questions, you can talk to Kim first, and I'm sure she'll shoot you over to me.
All right, great. Well, thank you. We're really happy to now own a house here. We love
Awesome.
it here. So thanks.
Great.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice
you.
meeting you,
All right.
Sam.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
So the other thing I was going to talk a little bit about tonight is I've been reading over the subdivision ordinance more, and we're polishing that up and trying to figure out how this new housing thing works into the workforce housing provisions of the subdivision ordinance, Kim.
Yeah.
That's going to be the interesting part. But there's Stephanie. We got the dream team here tonight, right now. Let me tell you, it's me and you guys. Stephanie's on mute. Can you hear us, Stephanie? Can you hear us?
Yes, I'm on.
All right.
Sorry, technical difficulties.
Hey, one of the first thing on the agenda though, guys, was there's supposed to be some sort of joint workshop that we talked about at the last meeting. And I did reach out to Kathy Miller, and she said something is scheduled for July 6th at 4. If you guys know anything about that.
No.
Except for, let me look.
I don't know if that was ever followed through. She said Dan McKay was supposed to be facilitating something that came out of the Economic Development Committee.
Oh, I'm on that committee and I don't have anything on my calendar. That's probably not good.
Okay, or it's
Yeah.
not happening on July
6, okay.
at
So
4.
July 6th at 4, you said, with then
That was what was in my notes.
365?
That was in my notes.
Hmm.
Yep.
MD 365, but
Nope, it's not from. MD
Economic?
365. It's from the Economic Development Committee.
hmm.
Yep. So remember we talked about this, and I was gonna try to facilitate something, but they had already started to set something up. So I'm
All right.
hopefully gonna get coordinated with Dan.
Let me look on the calendar.
That seemed to be the same.
Yeah, and there's nothing on the town calendar either, so.
Yeah, I already looked there too.
Oh, okay, yeah, huh.
I can follow up with Kathy, or somebody can, but the
Okay.
only reason I mean, I think this is a separate initiative to MD 365. It's more of a, it's a follow-up with the conversation we already had.
Okay.
But they seem to be a little farther. They had already taken some steps, I guess, to pull it together, the committee.
Unfortunately, I missed that meeting, so I wasn't aware of this.
Yep.
So,
I think I was at the meeting and I don't quite know what. Yeah, sure, okay.
Well, at our last meeting, we talked about the idea of wanting to participate or coordinate
Yes.
a joint, meeting with
Mhm.
other members of committees in town, so
Mhm.
that we can be working on coordinated efforts and not doing the same thing but differently. So if one group is working on one thing, we shouldn't be necessarily working on the same thing. And then sometimes I believe that if say the Economic Development Committee is working on a housing initiative that might relate to land use stuff, like the LUZO committee needs to be kind of in the loop on that, because ultimately, theoretically, it should go through LUZO
Mhm.
before it gets presented to the town.
Mhm.
So there's reasons to be coordinated.
how often does the Economic Development Committee meet, you know?
Not
Yeah.
off.
So you have no set days, like,
Months.
Every 3 months?
Every few months. I'm not exact. It kind of changes with who can make it, who can't.
Okay.
It's
There's
not.
no set date like us. There's no like
No.
third Tuesday of the month like we do?
No, 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 no,
Okay,
no.
okay.
Yeah, we had talked about including Board of Selectmen, Planning Board, LUZO, with adding some stakeholders like Island Housing Trust or MD 365, the Chamber of Commerce, the Neighborhood House, to talk about different things like housing or economic development or community development.
Mhm.
That's the purpose of the whole workshop.
Yeah. I think our last meeting was Monday, May 16th was our last one, I think. So, yeah, it's almost like an every other month type.
Again,
Yeah. So you must, so you won't meet again until probably the end of summer is somewhere. in that
Maybe
area?
they may try and put one in. It all, yeah, it kind of varies.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, I'll follow up because Dan McKay was supposed to reach out, or I thought Dan was going to reach out to me and I haven't heard from anybody. So
Okay.
I can take the initiative. I just don't want to duplicate whatever somebody else is doing. So,
Mhm.
all right. Well, there's that update. As I said, right before you joined, Stephanie, we're working on some short-term, just continuing that. We had a good discussion last time about short-term rentals, and we're just following up with what we talked about, which is
Okay.
drafting some language for
Mhm.
consideration by the board for potential. It's more of a registration ordinance than anything else.
could you bring me up to speed in a little snippet of what folks are beginning to think about in terms of short-term rentals?
Well, I think that there is some concern from some people in town that there may be an issue with short-term rentals, and we've been asked by Martha.
Is it Northeast Harbor? Is that specific to Northeast?
No,
Okay, no.
so we've stewed about it for a little while, Rick, and the board had asked us to look into it maybe
Last year.
before the last town meeting, and we looked into it a little bit, and I think came to the conclusion that the data that you have to really try to understand whether or not there's a problem. I can't say it's a problem yet because we don't really know if it's a problem. It isn't really there. So but the concern is if you take a town like Bar Harbor, which is regulating short-term rentals, it really does, because we're an island, start to push the demand for that to other communities. And I think the premise is, do we want to just start kind of getting not ahead of it in the regulatory sense, like what Bar Harbor is doing, but like just start to be a little more mindful of that as a land use that might have some implications for either affordability or neighborhood character or whatever. And I think if you look at a couple of maps that we did and some research we did early on, it just shows like how, Mount Desert is such a spread out community, and there's like pockets of rentals everywhere, and it's such a fundamental thing to the community. I'm like super cautious about how we try to set up the conversation to understand the implications, but also not be like, hey, we're coming out, making recommendations that we ought to regulate short-term rentals. So there's a couple of ways we thought about doing it, and one of them is more of a survey style, and it's a similar data gathering. So there's a survey style, which we say, hey, we could just send a mailing out to everybody and say, hey, do you do short-term rentals, and ask a series of questions so we can just understand what they are, and how they work,
Right.
and that kind of thing. Or there's
I think it might be helpful to at least have a discussion to try and reach a point where we thoroughly understand the nature of the problem if one exists.
That's exactly what we're doing. I'm trying to do, like, because I feel that there's a perceived potential problem, but we really don't know the extent of the problem because we don't have any data to back it up. Like, I don't know, I mean, we can go and do some research on Airbnb and AirDNA and try to get some stuff, but it's not
Right.
fully vetted.
And I don't know, data wise, anything regarding rentals, but regarding Northeast Harbor itself, 25 years ago, the population of year-round residents in this town was 950 people
Yep,
year-round. Today, it's 300, arguably.
right.
The houses didn't leave. The houses didn't go away.
Yep,
They've been bought up by others who do not live here. So
Yep.
what do they do with them? They either leave them unoccupied or they rent them.
yep,
And I don't know what kind of a problem that seems to be causing, but I would suggest that of the 300 remaining, they're looking for ways to improve their income situation to pay their taxes. And if everything just remains, or if we did away with it, I guess, that option for them, if you extrapolate those figures out another 14 years, Northeast Harbor is going to be a community where no year-round residents live. And
Yeah.
our seat of government will have no year-round residents. So
Yeah,
I think we need to be cautious in how we proceed.
absolutely.
No, when you guys had a discussion last month and Martha was here, what was her, because she's the one that's driving this the most. What was her concern and what was brought up to you guys as a board on what she's looking for? Did she say?
Yeah, I think my observation is that, she is just concerned that we need to pay attention to this as a potential issue. And it is an issue in many places where short-term rentals are business, but they're also contribute to decline in neighborhood character and other things. So it's a fact. I mean, there's a study I have a bunch of research that I've read about it, but I think to get to so that's what I think her primary concern is. Let's just pay attention to it and see if we need to do something about it. And so I'm trying to be very measured about it so that we can understand, keep the emotion out of the question as much as we can. Understand what, if any, the implications might be, and then make smart decisions about how you want to regulate it. I think affordability is the major issue in the town of Mount Desert, and short-term rentals, at least my observation is that short-term rentals are not are one thing that you have to deal with related to affordability, but not the major reason why there's an affordability issue in Mount Desert. Like so I think just to try to understand it, there's a few different ways which we set up or started to talk about, which are, hey, we could just ask people voluntarily to do short-term, to tell us if they do short-term rentals and what they are and how we understand that. And then the other ones, the other way to do it is just require people to register short-term rentals, and that has a lot of implications to it. So that's where we're
It's
headed.
worth a discussion. There's no question about that. I just don't want to see us creating a solution to a problem that doesn't exist.
I think we're on exactly the same page, and that you and I are saying the same thing. But let's figure out if there's a problem first, and then find the solution to what the problem is.
Exactly.
We already know that there's a problem with affordability. The other things that sort of neighborhoody character things that short-term rentals can do are like, if there were a bunch of people in Northeast Harbor today, and how does that, like in Bar Harbor, there are some neighborhoods which used to be neighborhoods that are more short-term rentals now, so it changes the character of the neighborhood. So those are all things that we can talk about, even as part of like the comprehensive plan, which we're also, just starting the update process. So I'm really cautious of making an emotional issue more emotional. So I just want to get to the data and then make decisions based on that. But in order to really understand what's up, you just need to know what you're dealing with. How many do we have? Are they, mostly it'd be great to know like how many are in what areas of the community are they concentrated? Are they seasonal people that rent their house out with the 2 weeks of the year that they can't be here? Or, are they year-round people that have to move to their camp or to a campground to afford the taxes and blah, 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 like all those stories that you hear. Like my
Right.
grandmother used to do in Bar Harbor when, in the summertime, she lived in her basement and rented out her house. In the summers, she could afford to pay, the taxes. And so I think there's a bunch of ways to go about doing it. So if it seems like I'm dragging my feet for certain things, it's because I'm pretty methodical about this particular topic and how we approach it.
Well, in Northeast Harbor was sort of a rental type place long before I think I mentioned before, we have a lot of summer homes that have been rentals for 50, 60 years. That people have come back the same month, the same, alternating families. So I don't want to, obviously mess with that.
And I don't think that's what we're suggesting, but I
Yeah.
do think the question is getting to Rick's earlier point, which is, back in whenever we had 900 year-round residents in Northeast Harbor,
Mhm.
and now we only have 300.
Right.
That's a problem. When I was in high school and when you and I were in high school, Stephanie, like
Yeah.
there were a lot more kids that I knew that lived in Northeast Harbor than do
Right.
today. And so,
Oh, yeah. The
Then-
school buses are full of kids. And well, because my kids went to North, full of kids that were on buses headed out to, Hall Quarry, Pretty Marsh.
yeah,
Yeah, you don't have as many walkers and,
right. So fundamentally, if you want to have the village seat, the town seat of the town of Mount Desert be
Mhm.
a year-round, more of a
Mhm.
year-round community, there are things that we need to consider. I don't know if short-term rentals is the thing it's going to be the tipping point, but just one data point in the process of like figuring it out. I think my observation is that you have layers of people that are kind of moving and this is an island-wide consideration, but you have, not to pick on Seal Harbor, but you have the Seal Harbor people and the value of the real estate is higher and higher and higher. And then some people that are kind of in that middle range of summer residents are now finding value in in Northeast Harbor, but the real estate is going up. And then people that might have lived in Northeast Harbor are now taking advantage of that. And then they're moving to like Hall Quarry or Pretty Marsh or Southwest Harbor, for example. And it's becoming like it's kind of trickling down to different parts of where, different income people are able to find value for their,
Mhm.
where they want either to their second home to be or their summer home, or, hey, I really want to retire here, but I have 10 more years I have to work. And
Mhm.
there's so many different things to consider. But affordability to me is a function of
Mhm.
the fact that you cannot buy a house in the town of Mount Desert for less than, $700,000 or whatever it was that
Yeah.
Katrina just sent me earlier this month. I mean,
Yeah.
it's,
Mhm.
it's a supply and demand issue.
Right. Well, and a lot of the people, say up on the hill, they are now having children who are having children, so they'll buy the houses for their kids to stay. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So anyway, long story short, we're working on some stuff for short-term rental. It's a very measured approach. We're trying to keep the emotion down and gather the data that we need to make smart choices.
Sounds good.
Awesome. I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I need to learn more. All right, the next one is, I think we need to I'm trying to kick this subdivision application thing or subdivision ordinance back to the front. And I think we're close to a point where I have a bunch of questions. I might send that to Andy sooner than later, Kim, so that we can iron out some of the nuts and bolts and then just have a good draft to chew on for the next couple months.
Yep.
But the way fundamentally what we're going to do that's a change would be to separate right now, the short term, the
Workforce.
open space and workforce housing provisions are kind of weirdly tied together, even though an open space subdivision and a workforce density bonus are totally different objectives. So we're going to try to separate those, and with the new affordability rules, I need to understand a little bit more how our density bonus calculations and their density bonus calculations kind of work. And it seems like you have to have those in a subdivision ordinance from what I was reading today. So that's going to be the most difficult part, I think.
Yeah, well, like I said, that the act to implement recommendations of commission to increase housing opportunities in Maine, like the study of zoning and land use restrictions that Governor Mills just approved on April 27th of 2022. She says municipalities need to implement it by July 1st of 2023, but this doesn't work for every town or city in the state of Maine. So, you know, this needs to be looked at. This, I mean, allowing multi-family dwellings, like on a lot that's only 9,000 square feet. Like I mentioned, this is, I went to a training and there were quite a few CEOs that were like, well, this isn't gonna work in my town because it's kind of like, it's just a blanket for everywhere, you know, and it's just not feasible. So I know this is gonna go back. The Maine Uniform Building, the Maine Building Officials Association, which is MBOIA for municipalities for code enforcement, is going to be going back to this committee to say, we need to tweak this. I mean, like it's any other, like typical on any other legislation that goes through, somebody's got to amend it.
Yeah.
So I don't know how this is going to be. Like I said, I just briefed it, but you know, I heard people at trainings, code enforcement saying, you know, this isn't going to work for every town or city in the state of Maine. So.
Well, I mean, I think let's not overreact to it. And, you know, the town of Mount Desert already has some good provisions in place, and some of them are already what they're, you know, kind of already what they're talking about. We still have to review that a little bit. And when they're talking about that 2.5 times the density bonus thing, that's for affordable housing projects. And affordable housing projects are a defined term. You know, how many affordable housing projects have we had in Mount Desert? How many are we going to have in Mount Desert? You know, it's not like there's going to be a rush on, let's, you know, create all this density because developers aren't going to just all of a sudden be able to afford affordable housing projects. They're just this law is just trying to incentivize in communities where it's not already incentivized, the opportunity to do affordable housing projects. But you know, even the language that we have, which I actually think is, you know, for our area, kind of interesting, just because it gives the developer a little bit of flexibility to define what affordability is. But if you're talking about 120% of the state, you know, the area median income, which is what I think the defined term is.
Yeah.
So that's still not like what you want in the town of Mount Desert. Might be one of those developments, but it might also be, you know, 3 or 4 developments where we're talking more, what I would call more of a workforce housing, where you say, hey, you know what, people at the lab or at the hospital, or, you know, sometimes my caretaker, you know, in a property makes more than 120% of the median income, but we want them, but they still can afford to live in town. So you want to incentivize those people, but they're already kind of triggered out by income if you use that affordability definition. So it's there are some things to really think about. I don't know where your 9,000 square feet came up with, but I have to look at that.
I was using that as a lot example,
Yeah,
just
okay.
a lot area example.
Yeah. So it really depends. I mean, they're not, and also I would say it is very much geared toward properties that are in designated growth areas. Did not go back to the growth area map and say, well, here's where Mount Desert's growth areas are, but I think we can all probably identify them. And then you have to be connected to public water and sewer.
Yep.
So there's not everywhere in every town in the state of Maine that's connected to public water and sewer. So it's,
Correct.
you know, I think we need to, before we freak out, understand, you know, these are the implications. It's not as dire. It's not like they're just saying, hey, your new density is, you know, 4 units per 9,000 square feet.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it could be really interesting. I think we're not that far off from what they already want you to do. I think about the subdivision rules though, in terms of like how we define workforce housing versus how they're defining affordable housing.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know,
Mhm.
I probably want to talk to Andy a little bit about this or Patrick and
Yeah, I
just
get it.
see, you know,
Yep.
something, but it's probably the best place for it is in the subdivision ordinance.
Patrick, Lyons.
So,
Okay,
Anyway, I'm spending time working on that.
okay.
And I have to schedule the village planning meetings. Shooting for July maybe, or early August for Otter Creek. Probably August now. It's almost July already, which is scary. That's where we are. Anything else?
I mean, there's gonna be some LUZO stuff that we gotta bring up.
Yep.
We got a zoning map change.
Yeah, we can queue that up anytime, really.
Yeah.
Oh, I did look it up. There is a July, I looked on my past email. There is a joint, it looks like, it is, I think MD 365 is kind of putting on the meeting and they've asked different groups to come. And it is July 6th
At 4.
at 4, yep.
Where? Do we know?
MD 365's office. And they're inviting representatives from each committee. There's the Economic, Chamber of Commerce, Mount Desert 365, Town of Mount Desert, COA, Summer Residents, and Friends of Acadia. And they're going to invite representatives from each of those organizations.
Should I send Kathy an email?
I'm surprised Luzo's not on it.
I said, that's Town of Mount
Should be.
Desert, that's kind of a lot of committees.
What's
Yeah.
that?
I said, Town of Mount Desert, that's kind of broad, there's a lot of committees and,
I think some committees may not necessarily be,
Needed.
needed. I don't know if that's, I mean, they're all needed, but it's,
All right.
for the
Yeah.
topics that we're talking about.
Mhm. Yeah. So I'm not sure.
And I would guess that there are probably like a handful of people that are on multiple committees that will probably go to that. I don't know.
So,
Anything on your list, Rick?
I just wanna, and it's just throwing it out there as food for thought. Go back to when we first formed the LUZO Advisory Committee, and the purpose behind forming it was to take a real hard look at the current LUZO, to see if there were portions of it that were becoming either unwieldy, redundant, superfluous, things that could be reformed or removed, to try and make it a living document rather than this, because it's grown exponentially year after year, it just keeps getting thicker and thicker. And so I guess I'd like to see a line item for our agendas for whenever our CEO comes across a piece of the LUZO that in her estimation doesn't, it's either not useful anymore, doesn't seem to make sense, is supportive of something that no longer exists or whatever, to at least be able to bring those up in these meetings for recommendations from this committee to the town meeting to eliminate them.
Yep.
From the LUZO. Any document that gets larger and larger over time, especially this one since 1978, experiences some areas where it outgrows itself. And there are things that are no longer needed, and times have changed, and now there are other things that we look at on our agenda that are needed, that we focus on. But I think we've put by the wayside those things that might be able to be weeded out.
Sure.
So maybe there aren't, but I think it's worth taking a look at, and anybody obviously could feel free to bring something up like that, but obviously our CEO is the most informed with regard to the current LUZO, and should have at least an opening in, like other items as needed on this agenda, to feel free to bring up some of those items to put on the next agenda for a discussion and consideration.
Yeah.
Just throw it out there.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and I try to keep that always in the back of my mind. How do we keep it simple in a ever complex world of
Yeah.
codes?
Simplicities. So black and white, not gray,
Right.
you know. Ugh. Yeah, because I mean, everything's subject to interpretation anyways,
Yeah,
right? I can get appealed on anything I write or say. You know, but if it's black or white, I guess, yeah, simplicity would be so much, it'd be easier.
well, I'll tell you one thing I struggle with is we have all these demands for village planning. So we really want to be able to do this or that in a particular area of town. And as we all know, when we start to apply certain rules in the current context of the way the zoning is, or the land use districts, like you do one thing that you think is good somewhere else,
Mhm.
and then in a totally different place in town, you're like, holy crap, that's not at all what I meant to happen. But it's because the zoning is almost too broad. And so it's like, I haven't quite figured out the answer to this, but so it's like, you can understand how a community can start to create more land use districts because you're trying to tailor a code to be more responsive to what is right there, as opposed to a broad brush, which in some situations is great, but in other situations, like what's good for Northeast Harbor is not good for Soamesville, and they have almost exactly the same zoning in some areas. Or maybe it is, and I think it's one of the things that we need to try to do better at is to say, hey, do you know that the current zoning in this area allows for these things, which might be completely the opposite of what people think is supposed to happen there, or very much in line with what people think is supposed to happen there. Those are kind of interesting village planning questions. That's why I keep, like with Otter Creek is a really good example. Like, yeah, people think you can't do a bunch of things out there, but if you really look at the code, I think a lot of the things that people want to do are actually probably already allowed. You just need to, understand the code a little better. That's been my observation. Or in Soamesville, for example, there's a bunch of things, there's a few things that you can do out there right now that you probably don't want them to do. Because it's a lot different. And we need to fix it. But I don't know. That's
That's tough, because how do you, like you say, how do you tailor the zoning? When you would
Yeah.
honestly, it'd be nice to have just rural, residential, and shoreland.
You can't do it.
I know, but, or commercial. I mean, that would be ideal, but you're right. It just, you can't, because like you said, even though there's like, what, 5 or 6 different little towns, they're
Yep.
all unique and different,
Kind of, yeah. I mean, that's what I'm really struggling with. So it's that keep it simple premise.
Yeah.
Without really but the keep it simple premise can also backfire. And that's the reason why things start to get a little more complex, but it's that slippery balance, right? We don't want to be like you know, Bar Harbor. But I can understand when you look at Bar Harbor, like how all of these village areas start to come into play. They're definitely an extreme example. Like, I'm not using them as an example, but you can see how certain things start to develop when you're trying to be responsive to what's there. Because theoretically, the zoning that's allowed is how you want that area to be or may, you know, become. If you want to be a proactively zoned for change, or you want to zone for what's currently there to protect what's there, you know. So you have really, it's pretty, I find it really challenging in Mount Desert to be responsive, but not like screw something up, which we've done a couple of times. So far, we've been lucky.
It would be nice to be able to go to each little community and sit with the residents and just, you know, have a public meeting with them and get their thoughts, you know.
That's a village plan. I think a village plan for the main villages would be really a good idea.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We tried that with our streets,
Corey,
but-
we're good.
What's that?
I said, Rick and I got Hall Corey. We're all good.
Well, maybe how Corey doesn't, you know, like how Corey's changed over time, but you know, you want it to be what it is today. Does the code really maintain that or not?
Well, we met with Otter Creek residents and they had no interest in doing anything there.
No,
They really didn't.
But I think that what they think they want to do, some people have said, well, shouldn't we be doing this or this? I mean, Otter Creek is a really interesting example because, you know, it's a really isolated kind of village area that could have some commercial activities, but it's surrounded by the park. I mean, it's just, there's like a main corridor going all the way through the community that if you don't think about it, could end up being, you know, a commercial strip until you get right to the park, which isn't necessarily what most people want. And that's why, but I think the zoning out there is actually doing a pretty good job of keeping it, you know, kind of the way you want it to, but there's a few things that might not be allowed that you really think should be allowed, you know? So it's I find Otter Creek is just really, it's a good case study for like how to think about a small little village plan.
Yeah. Well, you want
And then,
like
but I think Seal Harbor is another good example, you know, but I think about the history of Seal Harbor and, you know, there used to be one or two schools in Seal Harbor? One school, two schools? I don't know.
see, but the history and now it's the future. It's so different, you know. It's
Yeah.
just-
Exactly.
it's
What
hard.
do you-
We
what
try
do
to
you-
find a happy medium, but
Yep. Or I mean, Northeast Harbor could use a similar village plan. Like what, you know, why do we have a commercial area out in Sylvan City? Like I can't quite.
I know.
you know?
Yeah, that makes no sense.
I'm sure there's a good reason for it. But the question is, do you want this area to become this? You could plan it, you could scenario build that whole thing right out and say, this is what this is currently today what your ordinance would allow if somebody were to come in and just make all these changes. Forget about the real estate market for a little while. But you know, around the one stop, that's a really, really interesting area because it's so popular and it's a corner, it's like an intersection, a main intersection for the community. And the code allows for things that are very similar, are the same thing that you would allow in Northeast Harbor. So what we're saying is that we as a community want that part of Soamesville to become a village like Northeast Harbor. That's what the code says. I don't know if that's what people really want. So I don't know how to ask that question without like identifying all these things that might not be a good idea, but you know, so I don't know how to, I mean, those are to me really interesting planning questions. Like, is that what
You
you
also, yeah, and you also have residents that live along Soamesville that also want some allowed commercial uses, which there is some there, but do want that to look like Route 3, right?
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
and that,
it's unique, it's a unique area, it's had its history with being black and white shutter, you know, white buildings with black shutters and, you know, but you know, do people really want to see that build
Yep.
up like you see in Town Hill?
Right. And in
Right.
that scenario, that's a good example of, okay, you could change the allowed uses, but then you have to add more standards in place to make it be, to protect its, the visual character of the way it is right now.
Right.
In a
Yep.
corridor.
Yep.
And so
You'd
we're
have to
like,
have like a review board, and somebody, you know, like some type of
yeah,
committee to make it look like it's a residential, you know, strip of land, even though it's commercial, you know, but.
yeah,
Like the McDonald's Freeport.
yeah.
Exactly.
Perfect
Yes,
example. Yeah, we
exactly.
could do like a,
Exactly.
you know, in
think that
some
would-
areas of town, we could do, like in Northeast Harbor or some places, you could change the code structure around so it's more form-based and less worried, you're less worried about the use and more worried about form, you know, and that may be a great area for something like that. I don't know. But I think that's, it, you know, again, the market around here plays such a role in things like, you know, I don't picture Soamesville becoming a commercial corridor because the higher and better use of most of those properties is the ocean view. And, you know, we'd have to change all the shoreline zoning to like shoreline commercial or something too, or whatever, shoreline limited commercial, something like that, which you may want to do anyway, but I don't know. It's interesting, but it kind of goes in the opposite direction of what Rick was just talking about in terms of like having a less thick document.
Right, but you got the residents asking us, they're coming forward, asking us to.
Yeah.
You know, build up their area to allow, because of the Higgins store was a big example, you know, people
Hmm.
wanted, they wanted to have coffee shops, that'd be a cute little quaint coffee shop, well, couldn't do it, you know,
Right.
and then.
And then creating a standard that says, well, we know Route 1, or I mean, we know the whatever route that is. I don't know why I call it Route
102.
102. Yeah, I drive it almost every day and I still can't remember. Only been almost 50 years, but you know, the traffic, when you start to add that commercial element to a little coffee shop back when I was a kid and went to Higgins with my grandfather is a whole lot different than it is today. And just being able to find the safety of, you know, backing out into the street and, you know, allowing that use, but also having provisions that kind of, you know, other people are going to be concerned with. It's,
Sure,
I don't know.
it's hard.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Mhm.
But I think that, you know, the idea of adding density in Northeast Harbor was great because the infrastructure is there and that's theoretically where you want the most density. But I think, you know, just to get back to this whole affordability issue, like, you know, we should maybe start to think about, okay, we want to add density in Northeast Harbor, but we want to tie this to, you know, the affordability or the workforce. You know, if you're going to do this, then you need to give something back to the community kind of thing. So it doesn't just become, you know, hey, I'm Mr. Summer person with a lot more money and I'm going to buy this because I can and turn it into my family,
Yeah,
you know, whatever, or I can buy it and, you know, worst case scenario, turn it into weekly rentals. But
mhm.
and again, I have 2 weekly rentals, so I am not opposed to weekly rentals, just to put that out there. I just think it's, I think, you know, it's just interesting to think about.
Well, I'm not even sure that we're talking about weekly rental properties. I think we're talking about people who opt to rent out their primary living quarters on
Yeah.
a limited basis in the summertime to help them pay the taxes on their own home.
Yeah, and in that sense, that's what Bar Harbor did pretty well, is to say, look, they define different ways you can do it. And if you're doing it one way, you can do it. And if you're trying to do it a different way, then you can't do it.
Yeah,
You know, on a very simple measure way, but that's one way to think about it. I still think, you know, the best thing to do right now is really just understand what it is that you're dealing with and where they are, and then just sit on it for a little while and start to stew and think about it and then track it a little bit over time. And then the answer will, you know, you can start to think about the answer a little bit. But I think maybe the changes in the market might slow things down a little bit. We'll see. But I think Dave Ashmore made a really interesting point the other day, is that like, because of the prices of the real estate, like it's almost in the opposite. Some things are going in the opposite direction where you just can't afford to do it anyway. You can't afford to make that investment no matter what. But we'll see. Anyway, it's all good stuff. But some of these things should be tied to your comprehensive plan, like the village thinking, the future land use plan. So we're trying to tie it in. We'll try to tie it in. That's all I got.
This was advertised, by the way,
Yeah.
in the newspaper. Just saying.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah, you have to put that in
June
disclaimer
9th,
because this is being
yes,
recorded.
On
so.
June 9th. That's right.
Oh,
Okay,
Lord help us.
that's good. No, I think that's good. I'm glad. Don't forget to send me agenda for the July meeting. No.
When's that due? Like tomorrow?
No, I don't. No, not tomorrow. You got a little time. I usually put it in my calendar, but I
Yep.
remember I did that. I'm busy, so I need kind of a reminder.
Yep, I'll do it. It's probably going to be very similar to this agenda. Except for
Okay.
with the added areas for simplification topic.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thanks, Noel.
See ya.
Thanks.
See
See
you
ya.
guys. Bye, Stephanie.
Bye-bye.